today we're going to talk about modern migrations and capitalism. This is a very important connection that I want to make because we don't understand the nature of migration as a modern phenomenon and how it's linked, deeply linked, connected to capitalism and the evolution of capitalism. We will lose track of the main meanings of transnational migrancy and global diasporas. Modern migrations follow capital flows. Doesn't mean that where money goes, people go. It means that where money, the investments are monies and capital is accumulated, there will be a need of manpower, a need of labor. And this will be the attraction, the pulling force that will move people around. Migratory flows always occur along capital flows. That is, historically, capital draws the labor force, shaping labor markets to the scale of capital markets. So that periods of higher capital expansion are also always periods of massive migration flows. So I want to distinguish between three different notions that are actually interlinked, but they're different. And you will see why in a minute. The meaning of international, multinational, and transnational. The international arena, has to do with spaces, actually, comprises relations and policies between states, nation-states, and their citizens, or between different states. The multinational sphere covers the activities of corporations and institutions in different countries. And then the transnational refers to the flows and the activities that transgress legally or illegally borders and jurisdictions of nation-states. So this is important to understand the four main cycles in which we can actually organize, we can divide the different process of migrations in modern, since the advent of modernity. So, since the 16th century to the 18th century, we have colonial mercantilism, all the colonial expansion that began with the discovery of America in 1492. That's the beginning of the modern migration cycles. Of course, people have been migrating since the beginning of humankind. But when we talk about migrations now, we are talking about modern migrations. So modern migrations begin with the discovery of America and the colonial expansions of European colonial expansions. And during those centuries, there were three different kinds of migrants. The colonizers, the indentured workers, people who were, sent hired for labor and actually kept in a semi-slavery condition, and actually then, finally, actually slaves, people who were bought and sold as commodities in order to use their labor force. The direction of these migrations was from north to south and from south to south. North to south in the case of the Europeans coming to the Americas, that's very clear. And then south to south from the Africans who were taken and brought to the Americas as slaves. This period is important for the formation in the formation of colonial empires. From 1800 to 1929, and the dates, of course, are very arbitrary, we have the period of industrialism and imperialism, the development of the two first industrial revolutions and the expansion of the European empires. This is the golden age, we can say, of modern migrations. All our ancestors in the Americas have usually came during this period. What characterizes this migration is that people emigrated to become immigrants, to settle and become immigrants. The direction of these migrations were from north to south, usually from Europe or other places in the Middle East, for instance, and to the south. And this period is crucial for the formation of nation states, not only in the Americas, but also in Europe. Okay? It coincides with that. I mean, it goes beyond the focus and the limited time I have here, but this connection is very, very, very important. The third period between 1929, after the crash, economic crash of the 1929 and the 1960s, is actually a period of migratory stagnation. I mean, most countries actually prohibited migration, stopped migration, put brakes on migration, and the migratory movements actually were very, very limited. But in the early 1970s began a process, this process we are living today, of globalization and transnationalization of transnational migrations. Here the migrations change completely the direction. Instead of people going from the north to the north to the south, actually now they reverse the direction and go from the south to the north. There we have all these post-colonial cities in Europe, like London, for instance, that have been absolutely transformed by the people of the people coming from the ex-colonies, and actually completely transforming the life of European cities and European countries in a few decades. This is also happening in the U.S. Actually, the bulk, the push of the Latin American migration to the U.S. actually begins in the 1960s and 1970s, as you will see in the following week. Now, I want to introduce you to a concept that is somewhat difficult, but I think is crucial. The difference between immigration and transmigration, or between migrancy and immigration. During the modern times, I mean the 19th century, migrants came to the U.S. to settle, to stay, to form a family, to break, in most cases, to cut ties with their countries of origins and begin a completely new life. Nowadays, migrancy is different. It's experienced in a different way, and usually people come and go, always having in mind a possible return. That, most of the time, never happened, but anyway, that is always in the imaginary of people. This is also the period nowadays of the globalization of the nation states. We're going to talk about that later. So, the nation state is the nation state, and the correlation between transnational migration and the nation state is very, very important, because transnational migration continues to function as a safety valve that reduces social tensions inside the countries and prevents the outright dissolution of peripheral nation states. So actually, these people getting out, actually reduces the social tensions. It's like an open the floods, and for people who had no jobs or no means for self-maintenance. It is a fundamental gear in transnational division of labor, and this is probably the most important issue I want to stress during this talk, that transnational migration is a fundamental gear in the transnational division of labor by distributing according to the laws of demographic and economic markets those nations' cultural and human capital. And it is a net transfer of social, human, and cultural capital from poor nations to rich nations that reinforces the inequality consubstantial to the global regime of accumulation. So, this brings me to the issue of transmigrancy and labor. Migrants are very, very important. because they provide cheap labor, cheap skilled labor in all sectors of the host economies, contributing as workers and consumers to the development of these economies and their expansion. They are, in fact, a major factor in the current global distribution of power. It is articulated to other forms of labor that we will see in a minute, such as the informal economies, the maquilas, the sweatshops, and even illicit human trafficking networks.